She told me I'd never pass her class, unless I learned a lesson that couldn't be written in any book. I stayed after, not knowing that night would change everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. The day had ended the way so many of them usually did, students rushing out, backpacks swinging, chairs scraping across the tiled floor. Yet, for me, there was something different in the air that afternoon. The classroom, once full of chatter, now felt unusually still. The sunlight poured in through the tall windows, stretching long amber streaks across the desks, dust particles floating lazily in the glow. It was the kind of silence that didn't push you away, but instead pulled you deeper inside yourself. I was slow to pack up, deliberately slow. Maybe it was because I'd caught the way she looked at me during the lecture, her eyes holding for half a second longer than they needed to. Or maybe it was the simple truth I didn't want to leave just yet. Whatever the reason, my fingers lingered on my notebook, tracing idle patterns on the cover while I waited for something, anything, to happen. She was still at her desk, carefully stacking papers into a neat pile, though I could tell she wasn't in any real hurry. The movement of her hands was unhurried, almost thoughtful. Her blouse caught the last of the fading sunlight, softening her profile, and there was a tired elegance in the way she brushed a strand of hair from her face. She looked more like a woman reflecting on her day than a teacher closing out her class. Finally, she glanced up, catching me still there. A faint smile curved at her lips, not the professional kind she wore for the whole class, but something smaller, more personal. "You're still here," she said, her tone quiet but carrying across the empty room. I swallowed, feeling suddenly exposed. "Yeah. I was just finishing up." Her gaze didn't move away. Instead, she leaned slightly against the desk, her fingers drumming softly on the polished wood as if she were weighing a decision. The silence stretched between us, not awkward, but charged with something neither of us named. Then she said it, in that same softened tone, a mixture of teasing and seriousness. "You'll only pass if you learn the lesson I can't write on the board." The words landed heavier than they should have, echoing in the stillness. "A secret lesson?" I tried to laugh it off, but my voice betrayed me, coming out low and uncertain. "And what lesson is that?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady on mine, and for the first time I felt like she wasn't looking at me as her student, but as a man trying to figure out a puzzle he wasn't ready for. Her smile didn't give anything away, yet it carried the weight of unspoken meaning. In that quiet moment, the classroom no longer felt like a classroom. It felt like a doorway, one I was standing on the edge of, waiting to see if I would be invited through. The room had grown even quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the faint sounds of students laughing and footsteps fading down the hallway seemed distant, muffled, like they belonged to a different world. Here, in this space, it was just her and me. She motioned with her hand, a subtle gesture toward the chair beside her desk. "Sit for a minute," she said. It wasn't a command, more an invitation, but my pulse jumped as though I'd been singled out for something forbidden. I hesitated only long enough to slide my bag down to the floor before taking the seat. The distance between us shrank instantly. No longer a row of desks separating teacher and student, it was just two people sitting side by side in the late afternoon light. The closeness was startling. I could see details I'd never noticed before, the delicate curve of her wrist as she rested her hand against the desk, the faint silver threads glinting in her otherwise dark hair, the way her lashes lowered when she looked down at the papers in front of her. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence pressed in, but not uncomfortably. It was the kind of silence that asked you to pay attention. I became aware of everything, of the faint ticking of the wall clock, of the sun slipping lower and painting the chalkboard in warm orange, of the soft, clean fragrance that seemed to cling to her blouse. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you know what I meant earlier?" Her voice was low, thoughtful, as though she was asking herself the question as much as she was asking me. I shook my head, managing a small smile. "Not really. But you've definitely got me curious." Her lips curved at that, the corners of her mouth lifting into a smile that wasn't entirely professional. She turned toward me, her knee brushing mine under the desk, just lightly, accidentally perhaps, but enough to send a ripple through me. "The lesson," she said slowly, "isn't something you'll find in your notes. It's not about memorizing facts. It's about paying attention." Her words hung in the air. I frowned, half teasing, half serious. "Paying attention? I think I've been doing that all semester." She gave a small shake of her head, her eyes finding mine with a steadiness that made it hard to look away. "Not to the material. To people." Something in her tone shifted then. It was less like a lecture and more like a confession. As if she wasn't just teaching me, but revealing something about herself. I felt my chest tighten at the intimacy of it, the way she leaned in slightly, her voice softer now. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her meaning settle in. It wasn't just a lesson. It was a doorway, a test of whether I could see beyond the surface, beyond titles and roles. And sitting there, inches from her, I realized I didn't just want to pass. I wanted to understand her. The longer we sat there, the more the room seemed to change shape. It was no longer rows of desks and a chalkboard. It was something softer, quieter, like a cocoon around us. The fading daylight slipped across her face, outlining her features in a way that made her look almost unreal, caught between strength and fragility. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling softly as if setting down a weight she'd been carrying all day. Her fingers traced the rim of a paper on her desk before falling still, her gaze shifting toward the window. "You know," she began, her tone different now, less like a teacher, more like a woman speaking honestly. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone in this room actually sees me. Not just the title, the role, but me." The admission caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing teachers said, not the kind of thing anyone expected to hear in a classroom. Her voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard before, and it stirred something in me, something protective. I hesitated before answering, my throat dry. "I see you." The words came out softer than I meant them to, almost like a secret I wasn't supposed to share. Her eyes flicked back to mine, and for a second she looked as though she wanted to believe me but wasn't sure she could. "Do you?" she asked quietly, her brow furrowing the slightest bit. I nodded, my voice steadier now. "You carry yourself with so much composure. Everyone respects you, but there's more. I notice the little things. How you push your hair back when you're nervous. How your smile changes when you're actually amused versus when you're just being polite. You may think no one sees you, but I do." She stilled, her lips parting slightly as though she hadn't expected me to answer that way. Her hand, which had been resting on the desk, shifted closer to mine. Not touching, but near enough that the space between our fingers felt alive, charged with meaning. I could feel the pull, both terrifying and magnetic. The simple nearness of her hand made every nerve in mine ache to close the distance. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I held her gaze. Something softened in her expression. The guarded professionalism slipped just a little, replaced by a quiet vulnerability, the kind that doesn't often show itself to the world. "Maybe that's the real lesson," she murmured. "That being seen is harder than it looks." Her words lingered in the stillness, and I realized this wasn't just about a grade, or even about a lesson. This was about trust. About stepping past the walls we build around ourselves and daring to let someone else look inside. And in that moment I knew, she wasn't just teaching me. She was letting me in. The classroom seemed to grow dimmer as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long and soft across the walls. The world outside continued on, distant voices in the hallway, the faint slam of a locker, but here, between the two of us, the air was still. It was the kind of stillness that felt fragile, as though one wrong word could break it. She sat across from me, her face thoughtful, her gaze lowered to the surface of the desk where her hand rested. The papers and pens scattered around us suddenly seemed irrelevant, as though they belonged to a different kind of conversation. What mattered now wasn't written down anywhere. Her hand shifted slightly, her fingers brushing against mine in the faintest of touches, so light it could have been accidental. But then, slowly, deliberately, she let her palm settle over the back of my hand. Warm. Steady. Quiet. The effect was immediate. My chest tightened, and every part of me went still, focused only on the sensation of her skin against mine. It wasn't a bold gesture, not dramatic or reckless. It was simple, human. But in that simplicity lay something powerful. It said, "I trust you enough to cross this line." I lifted my eyes to hers, and she was already watching me. There was no teasing in her expression now, no shield of authority. Just honesty. A question, unspoken, in the way she held my gaze. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried more weight than anything she'd ever said in class. "The secret lesson," she said, "is presence. Being fully here. Letting yourself notice what matters instead of letting it slip by." Her words sank into me. Presence. Not just existing in the same room, not just nodding along to a lecture, but truly being with someone, seeing them, feeling the moment, refusing to let it dissolve into the blur of everyday life. Her thumb moved slightly, tracing a gentle line across my knuckles. It was the smallest gesture, yet it felt like an entire conversation. I wanted to respond, to move my own hand so it fit against hers more fully, but instead I stayed still, not wanting to break the delicate balance she had created. The silence between us grew heavy with meaning. My heartbeat was so loud I was sure she could feel it through my hand. She didn't look away. She didn't need to. The lesson was clear: connection didn't always come through words. Sometimes it came through stillness, through touch, through simply being there. Her hand lingered for a long moment before she finally withdrew, leaving a warmth behind that spread through me like a secret flame. And though the contact had ended, the truth of what she'd given me remained. I had learned something no textbook could teach. Sometimes the greatest lesson is to stay. To notice. To let yourself be moved by the presence of another person. And that night, in the glow of a fading sun, I realized I had no desire to look away. The room had slipped into twilight, that fleeting hour where light and shadow blend together, blurring the edges of everything. The glow from the windows had cooled to a soft blue, and the only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Each second seemed louder than the last, reminding me how fragile the moment was, how easily it could end. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture relaxed but her eyes fixed on mine with a steady intensity. It wasn't the look of a teacher assessing a student. It was something else, something raw and unguarded. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, silence stretched between us, weighted with 1,000 unsaid thoughts. I swallowed, my throat tight. The urge to speak rose inside me, pressing against my ribs, demanding to be released. I wanted to tell her how I noticed everything about her, the way her laugh softened the room, the way her presence made even silence feel full. I wanted to tell her that she wasn't invisible, not to me. That every glance, every small kindness had stayed with me far longer than she probably realized. But the words caught in my chest. How could I confess something like that without breaking the fragile trust she had offered me? How could I risk turning something so meaningful into something misunderstood? She seemed to sense the battle inside me. Her gaze softened, her head tilting slightly, and for a moment her vulnerability mirrored my own. Then her breath caught, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound, but enough to draw me closer, at least in spirit. I noticed then the faint blush rising in her cheeks, the way she lowered her gaze for the briefest second before meeting my eyes again. That single gesture, so small yet so telling, made my heart pound. It was as if she, too, felt the tension stretching taut between us. The silence broke only with the faint hum of the evening outside, a car passing, distant laughter drifting through an open window somewhere down the hall. But in here, time had slowed to a standstill. I opened my mouth to speak, but hesitation pulled me back. My hand twitched on the desk, aching to close the distance to hers, but I stopped myself. The line was too thin, too dangerous to cross. Instead, I held her gaze. Just that. A long, unbroken look that carried everything I couldn't yet put into words. And she didn't look away. She held it, steady and unflinching, her breath shallow but present, as if she was waiting, hoping, for something I didn't yet have the courage to give. The confession hovered there, unsaid but undeniable, suspended in the space between us. It didn't need words. In that lingering silence, we both knew. And sometimes, knowing is enough. The silence between us lingered, long enough to make the tick of the classroom clock feel like a drumbeat in my ears. My chest felt tight, not from fear but from the weight of all the words I couldn't bring myself to say. She sat across from me, still, her eyes deep with something I couldn't quite name, something that both invited me closer and warned me not to cross too far. Then, slowly, she moved. The shift was subtle but decisive. She pushed back her chair and rose to her feet, smoothing her blouse with calm, measured hands. Her posture was steady, composed again, as though she had gathered the fragile threads of the moment and woven them into something gentler. "Come on," she said softly, gesturing toward the door. Her tone was light, but not dismissive. It carried warmth, a kind of finality, but also reassurance. I stood, the scrape of my chair against the floor sounding too loud in the quiet room. My bag felt heavier than before as I slung it over my shoulder, my steps hesitant as I moved to join her. She walked beside me toward the door, her presence close, steadying. As we reached the threshold, she slowed. The hallway beyond stretched out in silence, lockers gleaming under the dim evening lights. The world outside the classroom looked ordinary, untouched by what had just passed, and yet I felt changed, as though I was carrying something invisible, something precious, that no one else could see. She turned to me then, her expression softer than it had been all day. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might speak, but instead she simply lifted her hand. Her fingers brushed against my arm, a light touch just above the elbow, lingering long enough to be felt, not long enough to be questioned. The warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my shirt spread through me like fire finding tinder. Her eyes met mine, calm but searching, as if she wanted to make sure I understood. And then she gave me a small, knowing smile, the kind that says everything words can't. "You've already passed," she said gently. "You've been paying attention all along." The words landed in me like a soft weight, grounding, steadying. It wasn't about grades. It wasn't about lessons on the board. It was about presence, about connection, about being seen. I managed a faint smile in return, my throat too tight to answer properly. She let her hand fall back to her side, though the echo of her touch stayed with me. Then she stepped aside, allowing me to pass through the doorway first. The gesture was simple, respectful, but in it was a quiet tenderness, an acknowledgement of the moment we had shared, and the boundaries she was carefully, gracefully choosing to set. And though no confessions were spoken, I left with the certainty that something had been exchanged, something real and lasting. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. The hallway swallowed me in its quiet as I stepped out of the classroom, but the echo of her words followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. "You've already passed. You've been paying attention all along." They repeated in my head with each step I took, as though my mind refused to let them go. The air outside the building was cooler than I expected, a soft evening breeze brushing against my face and tugging lightly at my shirt. The streetlights flickered to life one by one, spilling pale circles of gold across the pavement. Students passed in clusters, their voices carrying laughter, their energy still restless and bright. Yet none of it touched me. I felt separate, suspended in a quietness that was entirely my own. I paused just outside the doors, letting my bag slip from my shoulders so it hung loosely at my side. My hand still carried the memory of her touch, the warmth of her fingers against my arm, the calm steadiness of it. It was remarkable how such a brief gesture could leave such a lingering mark, as though my body had decided to memorize it. I looked up at the sky. It was shifting into twilight now, that brief in-between where the last traces of daylight give way to stars. There was a hush to it, a serenity that matched the calm yet charged feeling inside me. What struck me most was not the words she'd spoken, but the way she'd looked at me when she said them. It wasn't the gaze of a teacher fulfilling her duty, nor the distant politeness of someone offering encouragement. It was something deeper, more personal. It felt like she had looked past everything else, the roles, the setting, the expectations, and seen me as I was. That realization stirred something I couldn't name. It wasn't infatuation, not exactly, though attraction was undeniably there. It was something gentler, more grounded, yet just as powerful, the quiet astonishment of being noticed, of mattering. As I walked home beneath the hum of the streetlights, I carried that feeling with me. The world around me moved on, ordinary and unchanged, but inside, I knew something had shifted. I had stepped into a space where presence mattered more than performance, where connection spoke louder than any lesson written in chalk. And though I knew tomorrow the world would return to its usual rhythm, desks, lectures, assignments, tonight was different. Tonight, I carried with me a secret lesson no one else would ever understand. It wasn't about grades or tests. It wasn't about whether I passed or failed. It was about how, in the quietest of moments, two people could see each other clearly, if only for a fleeting while. And even if nothing more ever came of it, I knew that moment would stay with me. Like the warmth of fading sunlight on skin, like the echo of a voice soft but steady. A memory that would live quietly inside me, reminding me that sometimes the truest lessons aren't taught, they're felt. If this story touched you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find these quiet, slow-burn romances. And if you'd like to hear more stories of unexpected connection and secret lessons of the heart, make sure you subscribe and join me for the next one.